Hello classes. So I am making a screencast here for the feedback for our first homework, our first assignment. And this covers environmental ethics here at Red Rocks, so 218.802, also 218.801. But I'm also addressing my front range class that is 112.001. Okay, my ethics class. I kind of start out the two classes similarly. Okay, and so know that the feedback here is for both classes, or excuse me, all three classes. Okay, so let's go to the questions. So this is feedback for our first assignment. What is ethics in general? How are reason and conscientiousness understood in relation to ethics? What is meant by the term normative? Okay, so as I indicate, before you write, be 100% sure for all three classes that you check out this basic grading criteria for all written work located right here. Click on that if it doesn't pop up, because it pops up here because it's the last thing I looked at. And review this, okay? So there's a couple of mistakes. There's a few mistakes I'm already noticing. One is I notice that students might think that when I'm asking you the questions, what is ethics, I'm just asking you in general. I'm actually asking you to answer that in terms of the writing, okay? So or the reading, let's say, okay? So in other words, when you click on the PDF, what do you find when you look for the answer in the PDF? Okay, and we'll look at that PDF in just a minute. So be sure, because I could tell that some students have written their assignments as if I just simply asked you out of the blue, okay? Do not do that, okay? Another one here is this point. The word count. So I noticed that there are a few that are extremely brief, or that are brief. And so be sure that when I ask for 200 words, that you write to 200 words, because I could tell when it's not 200 words right away, and I have a way to get the word count pretty quickly, so I could tell. And what that's doing, as I indicate here, is that you're not giving me enough of an answer, okay? Here's another mistake as well I've already noticed, is this point on examples, okay? If I'm asking you for an example, that will be clear. If I'm not asking you for an example, it's probably best not to go there. Why? Because 200 words isn't very much to answer three complicated questions. So if you decide to offer an example, be sure that it's brief, and then also that it is ethical. Okay, and so you should by now start getting a sense of what is meant by ethical. And then likewise, in my environmental ethics classes, is it environmentally ethical? Okay, so in other words, is your example something about you going to a restaurant and etc., or is it a question about pollution or climate change or water use, overpopulation, in other words, environmental concerns? And then with just my ethics classes in general, make sure that your examples also have to do with just ethical examples, right? Issues of right and wrong, so on and so forth. If you offer an example and if one is asked for, if it is not asked for, I would keep it to a bare minimum, okay? Let's see. And then, of course, you want to pay attention to the rest of these, okay, as well. So that's primary, even before you write, okay? Then, let's go to this Introduction to Ethics, and this is from SOAS University, London. Okay, and if we click all the way down here to where I had you start, which is page 8, I think it's coming up here. Right. right here. So, yeah. Okay, so it's page 8. And the study of ethics belongs primarily within the study of philosophy, within the discipline of philosophy, in the subdiscipline of moral philosophy, and so our account begins there. And notice here the emphasis on study, okay? So in other words, I point that out in a lot of folks' homework. So a lot of students were writing that ethics has to do with rules and regulations, that sort of thing. And the answer is yes, it does, but it's not just about rules. And so in other words, this isn't a class just about listing off the rules, right? We're looking at the grounding for those rules, how we understand those, how we justify those rules and guidelines. What does it mean to point out that something is right and wrong? How is it that we theoretically understand that? Okay, etc., etc. So always remember it's the study, okay? It is a study, so that's what you are doing right now, is you're studying ethics, okay? So you can't forget what you're doing, right? Then B, how are reason and conscientiousness understood in relation to ethics? A mistake that students will make is they think that this is consciousness, okay? Remember, it's conscientiousness, okay? And then also there's reason here. So let's go to the PDF. We're looking at what is philosophy in general so that you get an idea of what philosophy is in general. Scrolling down, down, down. What is ethics? What is ethics concerned with? This gives you a sense of how it is that we're understanding what ethics is, so you could expand on your definition. The differences between ethics and morality. This text points out that ethics and morality are actually synonymous, okay? We have normative ethics there, but let's hold back just a little bit here because there's an answer there. Okay. Moral intuitions and critical reasoning. Okay, so in these two sections here, the authors cover rationalism, right here too. Some people focus on this. So reasoning, how we understand reasoning, and that's excellent if you did, by the way. Yet, there was one little element. So, in other words, I do want you to focus on what's pointed out in these sections here. Okay. But also this little point right here, this first paragraph, okay? So let's look. Almost all people to a greater or lesser extent are capable of experiencing feelings of empathy toward others. Empathy provides us with a sense of what others are feeling and may thereby allow us to identify with other people. Empathy, therefore, gives us what Trayer refers to as our moral sentiment. Trayer, by the way, is an author of environmental ethics books. I have a textbook of his, so he's an expert, referring to our moral sentiments, and ethical reasoning about these sentiments gives us our moral principles. The integration of these moral sentiments and principles, Trey argues, is our conscience. Okay? Now, the way to remember this word is I often make fun of it in class, like when I'm at the whiteboard, where I write it down and pronounce it conscience. Okay? That's the way to sort of distinguish it from consciousness. Okay? So, or conscious decision, or not to be confused with that which is unconscious. Okay, so conscience or conscientiousness is having to do with the combination of reason, and then also the authors are mentioning empathy here. Okay, and empathy is another word for the way we understand emotions as well. So empathy is an emotion we feel. So in other words, empathy here is really an example for emotions, or best said, are moral sentiments. So sentiments here should ring a bell in accordance to David Hume. He's referred to as a sentimentalist. In other words, he's not having warm feelings about things that have happened in the past necessarily. Sentiments there is more of a technical term, highlighting that he bases morality on emotional perception. Okay, so here we have the idea that conscience has to do with reason combined with moral sentiments or combined with emotion. Okay, and we're getting a sense of reason here, so I'd like for you to show how reason is worked out, and I know a lot of students did that. Okay, so now to the third question, what is meant by the term normative? So let's go back here to what we just looked at really quick. It was right here. Now, normative is interesting because I know that a lot of students write that it seems like the root word is normal. Okay, and that is tricky. The reason why you don't want to necessarily attribute it with being normal is because being normal is not necessarily a fine or virtuous attribute, right? That in other words, normal people might not be inclined to great courage when they need to, or they might not know that they're doing the right thing, okay? Whereas normative more has to do with this. So normative, in contrast, is the study of ethical acts. It therefore focuses explicitly on questions of what's the right thing to do in general. So in other words, okay, well, let's continue reading. Normative ethics is concerned with questions of what people ought to do and how people can decide what the correct moral actions to take are. Now, what that means is that again, ethics is a study. So ethics is the study of, normative ethics is the study of how it is that we understand what the right thing to do is. So in other words, we will be talking about normative ethics for a good part of the class. So in other words, normative ethics has to do with how it is that we justify or theorize what is the right thing to do, what we ought to do. Okay, so that's a tricky question. I put it out there because I wanted to see how students wrote about it. So don't get distracted with thinking of it as normal or ordinary or anything like that. What we're meaning more is it's normative in the sense that it serves as a guideline or a principle for how we ought to do something. Okay, so that should get us started, and that's the feedback for, so if you received less than 100%, you want to consider the points that I'm making in this feedback video, okay? If you received 100%, you probably hit these points nicely, okay? So thank you, and talk to you later.